Hey everyone, it's the Brain in a Vat again, and this one is going to be different. I thought today I would come out from my vat for a bit to say a few things that have been on my mind since I started this page last week. It will be a bit of an introduction, some admissions, some quite serious philosophy, and even a talk about politics, ethics, critical thinking, and scientific skepticism, which is, after all philosophy. I will also allude to some science as well, and even discuss some thoughts about the direction that I take this channel. I will do my best to bring much of the true crime phenomena into scope somewhere, but it will be more of a helicopter perspective on things that relate to a lot more than just true crime. I fear it's going to be quite a lengthy talk, so if you're not interested in all that, here is your TLDR warning. Wait, that's what I say on my Facebook forum when posting another one of my long essays. This isn't really too long didn't read. It's what? Too long didn't listen, I suppose? So here is your TLDL warning. And to all those who wish to go off to do other more interesting things, I wish you all a lovely day or evening. So I think I'll start with a shout out to the lovely gentleman who came to take some shots at me a few days ago with the charming moniker, Fuck Off. No, I wasn't lying when I said I had started the channel last week. I'm not really in the habit of lying, although that's really ultimately for you to decide that sort of thing. You see, I don't like embarrassing myself very much. I'm a bit proud that way. And fortunately, I have the rather unfortunate problem of not having a very good memory. So, in the words of the probably misattributed Mark Twain quote, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. So, yes, there are two other videos on this channel from several years ago. One is a podcast teaser from a time where I was entertaining that idea, and the second is a video on Philosophy 101. Both were made by someone else for the Scientific Skeptic channel. The Philosophy one is based on an audio recording I made from an essay I had written several years prior. And my girlfriend actually made both of these videos and figured out how to do it all on her own and in fairly short order. She happens to also be my co-admin on my science and philosophy forum on Facebook and my girlfriend for the last 8 or 9 years. We actually met there, even though I was anonymous, as I remain today. And how we got together is a rather cute story. Maybe I'll tell you about it someday, and you might even get to meet her. She's a doctor. She lives in Athens, Greece, and she was raised by two physicists and is far more intelligent than I am. I think she needs one of those shirts that says, "I'm with stupid," written on it. And at that stage, I had not yet taken on this brain in a vat persona. And I'll let you know what that's all about later, too, if you stick around that long. Did I already say this was going to be a long talk? And the evidence, as if that's even at all necessary, to demonstrate that I didn't make those videos, is that they're actually quite well done. They have graphics and video and music and stuff. And maybe, as you can see, alas, I'm worthless on this whole video making thing. I'm just beginning to learn and really have no idea what I'm doing. It's a miracle that I somehow figured out how to make an audio, export it, import it into a piece of video software, render it out, and then upload it successfully to YouTube. I can barely get a decent audio recording at this point. But I did figure out how to add a video clip the other day and even add pictures. Progress, right? So as far as production quality goes, I'm at the beginning of the learning curve, and I apologize for that. I'm a bit embarrassed. I promise to try to improve the production value of the videos going forward. I don't like much being a hack in anything I do, and it's not fair to you. You see, I'm primarily a writer, I suppose, at this point. I've been writing essays for more than a decade now, mostly on philosophy of science, moral philosophy, critical thinking and skepticism, and straightforward science in both the physical and the social sciences. So, a bit more about me now. My formal background is in political science and economics. I have a master's degree in each of those respective domains, as well as a Bachelor of Science. I did look into getting a PhD in industrial psychology a few years back, but I did never follow through. But none of that, my credentials, should really matter. I think it should always be about ideas and the arguments put forth, which either support those ideas or rather refute them. And if an idea holds up well under rational scrutiny, we might want to tentatively accept it. And if it doesn't, maybe we should dismiss it. As I like to say, think about ideas and beliefs as socks. If they serve their purpose, put them on and wear them. And if they wear out under scrutiny, discard them and wait until you are presented with better socks, or simply go barefoot if only bad socks present themselves. So a bit more on my background. I began my academic career consulting and doing economic and political science research in the international public sector at the United Nations and for various organizations throughout Europe. I lived at the time in Geneva, Switzerland, where I finished my postgraduate work. I ended up staying in Switzerland, that I like to call adult Disneyland, for 17 years. I speak a few languages, but I am sadly getting a bit rusty these days from lack of use, so certainly feel free to communicate with me in French, at least, if you'd like. I'm now back in the U.S. for a bit more than a decade. Time flies. And America is not the country that I left in the early 90s. I think it has lost its collective mind, quite honestly, and the disease that seems to have taken hold is contagious. And it's not exclusive to the U.S. It is propagating elsewhere as well. All of that is, after all, why I began a Facebook forum a decade ago, and in part, it's why I'm here as well. Without going into too much depth about what I think the possible causes of this seeming collective nervous breakdown are, given that, Lord knows, I've certainly written feverishly about the topic ad nauseum, I think that what we're experiencing is a sort of moral panic and a bit of a societal implosion. Entropy seems to be taking hold and winning a game of tug-of-war against civil society. I usually refer to the general phenomenon as runaway relativism, or as I alluded to in a previous video, the revenge of the layperson. It's often also called the post-truth era, which has as its calling card the proliferation of mis and disinformation and an almost comprehensive abandonment of respect for institutions, expertise, and even a concern for the truth itself, whatever that might be. As a political scientist, hopefully fairly well versed in history, we have seen this sort of thing before. It's not novel. And this general phenomenon affects pretty much everything. Not surprisingly, then, it also manifests in the true crime space and the recent bandwagon effect on YouTube and elsewhere. This post-truth era can be qualified and described in many ways, but one of the most glaring causes seems to be an utter lack of adequate critical thinking skills among the general population. And people don't know who to trust anymore. Some people don't seem to trust anything at all anymore. And many are just making up reality from the seat of their pants, minute to minute. This form of relativism, this cultural panic of sorts, often borders on nihilism and even has a rather ominous smell of a growing anarchism and is manifesting as societal decay, a sort of rot that has set in and is seemingly growing. So, enough of that rather depressing and serious philosophical stuff. But if that is true, all that begs the question of what can be done about it. What can we all do as mere laypersons and rather insignificant members of the same species? I, unfortunately, don't have any easy answers for you. I've certainly made many proposals and prescriptions known in my extensive writing over the years, but I am a no one, and it's quite unlikely that my small contribution has any impact at all on anything. So at this point, I'm really struggling with trying to figure out the direction that I want to take this channel. What is the scientific skeptic going to become? Is it merely an extension of my website of the same name? Or is it to become something different entirely? I already have an existing format on my SCTS page, which is short for Science, Critical Thinking, and Skepticism, which could probably be summed up in a few words. It's an intellectual forum, it's an educational forum, and it combines my two passions, science and philosophy. And for what it's worth, I chose to not monetize that almost decade-long volunteer project or my website, while many pages, which actually cloned SCTS, began as our earliest members and have gone on to convert it into a livelihood. I only began doing this because I was worried and because it's my passion. I've spent the better part of 3 decades of my life trying to learn stuff, and I like to share it and teach it. I love having interesting conversations about complex topics and finding other like-minded individuals who are intellectually curious like me. Now, those sorts of topics might not necessarily be your thing, although I guarantee you that there is a lot, if not all, that affects you in some fashion or another. You really need only be curious and share a willingness to learn, also, like me. You see, I don't want to be a dupe. I don't want to be exploited. And I don't want to end my limited days on this planet being any more ignorant than I have to be. And I don't want that for any of you either. Now, based on some of the feedback I've been getting here and on Twitter, I have the impression that some of you might hope that the role I adopt here becomes something like a true crime watchdog to serve as some sort of much needed oversight function to keep people more honest and bad channels in check somehow. I certainly did come here to perform that role, actually, within a very limited scope and in regards to one channel in particular. And given that that underlying problem persists, I may continue to do so. Last week, I was already planning on moving on and shifting direction. Now I'm not so sure of that. I had been superficially noticing from the outside some rather troubling developments in the YouTube true crime space, but my perspective always tends to be a bit more from a helicopter view, more from a psychological, sociological, and even ethical perspective. And I had been writing about it before the situation that brought me here even occurred. In some ways, I've been writing about the same problem for that entire decade. The problems that I noticed in the true crime space are endemic pretty much everywhere in our world these days. It's not only a problem of irresponsible, immoral, and incompetent YouTubers either. The problem is ubiquitous. Social media is just the vehicle or the medium by which many different sorts of viruses are spreading. Now, I still don't think I'm interested in pigeonholing this channel or my focus as a true crime source. And as you can see, I don't really have an interest in covering true crime cases in any traditional way. Lord knows there are enough sources for that, which occupy a rather broad spectrum of varying degrees of quality. Some are great, some are quite good, but far more, much less so. And at the risk of sounding mean, unfair, or even wrong, if you ask my honest opinion, I'd probably say that something like 90 or 95% of the channels that have jumped into the true crime space probably shouldn't be there at all. True crime is a serious topic. It requires a set of skills to cover it fairly and ethically, and to treat it with the sensitivity and care that it deserves. These are real victims. These are real families. This is real grief and loss. And for many, that will never go away. And I know, to some extent, part of it is just entertainment, or even a hobby. I know that some element of it is just people who like the true crime genre and sort of choose a channel to accompany them and to talk about stuff together. Channels, in that sense, sort of become a trusted friend to people, I think. A community, more than necessarily an authoritative source of high-quality information in the true crime genre. And then there is the drama. I've barely stepped a toe into those waters, and already it gives me the goosebumps and the chills. I'm not looking forward to that at all. But, like with every new subculture and tribal phenomena, power dynamics inevitably and quickly emerge to fill the vacuum. Cliques develop, alliances form, dirty games and backstabbing commence, and even Faustian arrangements can come to be. Power and competition begin to coalesce around certain poles, certain major players who try to move up a hierarchy, and lesser players desperately trying to get a foothold and advance up the ladder. This is called politics, people. It's what a social animal like us does. Now, I know a thing or two about politics. It is, after all, a part of my formal academic and professional experience. But it's also part of my life experience. And it's part of your life experience as well. We all do politics every day. It's a central feature of our nature. We evolved as a particular type of animal, a social animal, with a few fairly simple directives, some basic programs, if you will. We seek out and long for belonging and acceptance. We are driven by the need for achieving and maintaining social status. And some of us are far more ambitious than others. And we are also motivated by sexual selection pressures to find viable mating partners, to reproduce with, and for companionship. We seek out trusted allies, friends, acquaintances. We form networks and join tribes for that sense of belonging and even validation, and also sometimes to confirm our worldviews. This all leads to a lot of our behavior like competition, envy, hate, and even insecurity. It results in sociological and group psychology phenomena like tribalism, in-group, out-group dynamics, scapegoating, and inevitably, conflict. And all that gives rise to different forms of politics, or political behavior, if you prefer. Politics essentially describes and is mostly synonymous with just social behavior. Now, we normally think about politics only at the macro level, in the context of organizing large groups of people at the local, regional, national, and even international level. We think about it in the context of governments and politicians. But politics is far more than that, and also exists at a micro level, even an interpersonal level. We're simply all doing it, and we're doing it all the time, without necessarily even noticing it or being aware of it. For myself, after having spent a couple decades in the treacherous world of corporate politics, and as an observer, student, and participant in various other tribes, I think I have a decent idea about what politics looks like and how it works, to some extent at least. I have had a lot of opportunity to work with and consult for very large institutions and even at very high levels, like boards of directors and senior management. And I think that that has given me some privileged insight into what politics looks like at the top of the game and played by experts. But I still admit to being quite naive. And I think most of us are. And there really are some people out there who can only be qualified as something like political monsters. And they see everything in quite stark and zero-sum terms. And they are masters at playing political games. They even thrive on and revel in it. Now, that's simply not my cup of tea, nor is it my forte. But I think it's incredibly important to try to figure out how the game works here. If you don't, you will likely spend your life being a frequent victim to those who play it better than you and who have no qualms or hesitance when it comes to exploiting your naivete for their gain. That is why I try to do what I do. I don't want good and honest people to be exploited or taken advantage of by these political monsters among us. These monsters, these opportunists, come in all shapes and forms. Sometimes they are salesmen. sometimes marketers, sometimes entrepreneurs, and they certainly often wear the official title of politician. They try to sell you things. Sometimes it's just favor, but mostly it's services, products, and ideas which benefit them in some way, either socially, politically, or economically. Now, to be fair, sometimes transactions are equitable and both sides gain equal benefits, and that's great, but that's not really what I'm talking about here. So, in the context of YouTube, but also everywhere else, we just can't avoid the fact that there are also certain perverted economic incentives which can and do corrupt otherwise good and moral people to do things and act in ways which are dishonest, or worse. After all, we live in a capitalist world for the moment. We all need to pay our bills. The question is only, what are we willing to do to pay the bills? Are we willing to sacrifice our integrity, go against our principles, exploit the gullible and weak-minded, lie, employ less than ethical economic means to achieve our ends? I will leave you to decide that for yourselves and what you consider to be fair, honest, and decent behavior to pay the bills. I am an economist, but I'm not an anti-capitalist. I promote only an ethical capitalism. And those who are willing to employ unethical, dishonest, illegal, or even criminal and violent means to achieve their ends will be my target until I take my last breath. So, in the context of the true crime bandwagon, all of the things that I have discussed thus far are applicable. And I've been watching and learning as I go. I even know a few of the players who are possibly the targets I just referred to. And again, my objective is that you not get duped, that moral and responsible people not get played and not get served up bad information, especially willfully served up bad information. So personally, I'm going to be very careful here with whom I associate, and I will carry a rather large bag of salt with me when listening to what people tell me. I have this pesky and rather obstinate habit of preferring to remain independent and to try to draw my own conclusions about things. And hopefully, based on evidence and sound reasoning, and certainly constrained by my own moral standards. I'm weird that way. I just don't want to look in the mirror at the end of the day and hate myself for something bad that I've done. And I have long paid social and even career consequences for not being very tribal. I just don't tend to affiliate. I don't tend to network. I guess I just prefer my intellectual autonomy, or when I do associate with people, it's because I like them and for no other reason. I think it helps me preserve my integrity to some extent, somehow, even if that comes with possibly negative consequences. So before moving on to a different subject entirely, I'd also like to say something about what I might call a hierarchy of responsibility. If someone wants to start a blog or a YouTube channel, for example, let's call it Bob's page. Bob should be free to really talk about more or less anything he wants to. He can let his opinion fly freely in the wind and shouldn't really feel too constrained. Well, I mean, Bob still should have the typical civic responsibilities, like trying to be honest, trying not to lie, trying to be thoughtful and fair, to make reasoned arguments, and being careful about the quality of sources and ideas that he shares and promotes. I think he should still do the minimum of due diligence before releasing his opinion into the wild to fly freely across the internet. But his burden of responsibility is at the bottom of the hierarchy, just above someone who doesn't have a platform at all. And from there, responsibility scales up. Bob is on the bottom rung of the responsibility ladder, simply by virtue of his smaller audience. But all those who have larger audiences, and thus larger influence, have a greater burden to bear. And as an individual or a group climbs this responsibility ladder, their responsibility and care should scale rather exponentially, with the biggest players holding a disproportionately higher level of responsibility than the smaller ones. So now, if I haven't somehow already scared you, offended you, or bored you enough at this point, I need to discuss something else important. You might have noticed my name and my icon and wondered what they mean. So while I'm not necessarily fond of labels, labels are useful as shortcuts to give others information about your worldview, your philosophy, the ideas and values that you wish to promote and champion. I find Scientific Skeptic as a useful label. It goes a long way at describing my general philosophy of things. I could also associate myself with things like philosophical realism, methodological naturalism, positivism, materialism, or just rationalism. My intellectual toolkit is based around two primary tools, two axioms: reason and science. They form the basis of my epistemology, the way I go about trying to know things, and to try to differentiate between that which I simply believe and that which I might be able to claim that I know. If I claim to believe something without good reasons and sufficient evidence, it's important that I qualify that as nothing more than my belief or opinion, and not to refer to it as knowledge or even truth. Scientific skeptics evaluate truth claims. That's what we do. It's also what philosophy and science do. It's about trying to also figure out what we can say and can't say about the nature of reality itself. Scientific skepticism combines the two. Now, scientific skepticism, however, is only one manifestation or one school of skepticism. There are more than one schools of skepticism, and this area of inquiry has a rather long history, going all the way back to the ancient Greeks and a guy named Pyrrho. Now, I've been meaning to write a comprehensive piece on skepticism for years, and I already have a lot of unfinished work. So someday, maybe, hopefully, damn it, I'll finish it, and maybe I'll even post it here. So it's important then to differentiate between scientific skepticism from another major competing school of thought, and also to differentiate it from the layperson definition or meaning of skepticism, which are not the same things. Philosophical skepticism, for example, which you might know as Cartesian skepticism, focuses on the limits of knowledge itself. What can we claim to know, and how much certainty can we ascribe to any belief or knowledge claim? And in its strongest form, philosophical skepticism even doubts our capacity to acquire knowledge altogether. Can we claim to know anything at all? It even questions the nature of reality itself. So without going any further into depth, because that would require another 3 hours, suffice it to say that my icon, a brain in a vat, is a nod to that school of thought, philosophical skepticism. I think any good thinker needs to question what he or she can claim to know, because we can't truly know that all of this is not illusion or a possible simulation. Think the Matrix, for example, if you need a simple heuristic. Maybe we are simply a brain in a vat somewhere in some sort of universe-like thing, and that all of what we perceive as reality is just an imaginary Cartesian theater occurring only in a mind, and that everything seemingly out there is not real at all. So as a scientific skeptic, then, I don't put much weight onto that whole line of thinking, but not because I think it is either irrelevant or without intellectual value. It's simply not the focal point of scientific skepticism. And finally, the layperson meaning of the word skepticism, this causes a lot of confusion in society. The layperson meaning has nothing to do with the philosophical schools of thought I just mentioned. Skepticism, in layperson terms, simply means doubting things, or at least in its most current form. It's the sort of generic doubting that is just a part of our evolved nature. It comes naturally. It comes more naturally to some people than others, but it comes naturally. Now, some skepticism of this form is well-founded in reason and evidence, but much more of it, not so much. And some skepticism can even be considered something more along the lines of cynicism, or radical skepticism, contrarianism, or even simply relativism or nihilism. So, enough with the ontology and epistemology for today. I don't want to put you all to sleep. So my brain in a vat, the icon, is simply a reference to a value that I hold dear and that is central to my moral philosophy. And that value is called epistemic humility. That value helps me accept and remember and acknowledge my ignorance, my overwhelming ignorance. I wear it to promote that value and to implore others to be careful with beliefs and ideas and the things that we accept as true, to constantly question things and to remain intellectually humble. Choose your beliefs carefully, to the extent that you can choose them at all. So here's the thing, and this is sort of our warning, I suppose, so that you know in advance. People don't tend to like scientific skeptics very much. We're not very popular at dinner parties. I even tend to take off and not wear my skeptic hat in my everyday life and in normal social contexts. We're sort of known for being buzzkills, dream killers, destroyers of wishful thinking. We're often considered cold, closed-minded, and accused of either being nihilists or not believing in anything at all, or somehow lacking the ability to see and appreciate beauty and magic in the universe. That's simply not true. I believe in and love all sorts of things. I see beauty in nature everywhere, and in people and other non-human animals. I love music. I'm a musician. I love animals. I love good people. My parents were both artists, educators, and writers. So I would hope to dispel that rather inhuman aspect to the standard criticism of scientific skepticism. So if you like Carl Sagan or Neil deGrasse Tyson, or even humanists like David Attenborough, even Bob Ross or Mr. Rogers, you might find our moral and intellectual compass closely calibrated with those coordinates. The problem is that because we evaluate truth claims, it's quite possible that scientific skepticism eventually steps on someone's cherished beliefs, beliefs that are firmly held by many people and considered to be true. And in many cases, these beliefs are central to their identity, which means that if an idea is evaluated and not found to hold up very well under rational and scientific scrutiny, you're going to inevitably offend someone, even if that is not your desire. Scientific skepticism, then, is the slayer of sacred oxen, where oxen refers to many cherished beliefs. But the objective is not to be gratuitously provocative, mean-spirited, or simply to offend or hurt people. It's an effort to figure out how things really are. It's an effort to challenge bad ideas and to promote better ideas. It's an effort to protect people from bad ideas and those that promote those bad ideas. There is a certain consumer advocacy and ethical aspect to what scientific skepticism is all about. As has been said by far smarter people than I don't want to hold an untrue belief any longer than I have to. And I can't help but think that holding too many untrue beliefs is not a good thing for the world or for anyone. And I'm pretty sure that holding a large basket of untrue beliefs has something to do with being more easily duped and exploited, as I explained earlier. I don't want to be ignorant. I don't want to be duped by political monsters and unscrupulous brokers who don't have our best interests in mind. And I don't want that for any of you either. I simply think that a world with more good ideas is better than a world with more bad ideas. And I think the truth, whatever that might be, is better than a lie, even if it might provide some sort of temporary comfort. And try as they might, those who argue that certain bad ideas, certain likely untrue beliefs, can be useful, even if not true, I have yet to be convinced of that claim. So I'm going to leave you there with one final note. I'm still experimenting here, and I don't know what I will do next. I'm certainly open to any of your feedback, though. And one last thing on humor. Things are a bit hectic these days. Have you noticed? And I think we can all use a bit of humor and maybe even laugh at ourselves a bit more. Humor in the form of satire or parody as an educational tool has long been a part of my intellectual and rhetorical arsenal. It can get people to lighten up and even learn things, while sometimes their defenses are held further at bay. Educationally speaking, I have found it to have some very interesting results. And I also often enjoy self-deprecation or mocking myself, also hopefully to positive effect. So if there's anything I enjoy more than intellectualism, it might just be being able to make people laugh and smile. So, a bientôt, and signing off for now.